Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. And I'm your host, BADBABY. And tonight we have with us Robert Guffey. Robert Guffey is a lecturer in the Department of English at California University in Long Beach. And tonight we are going to be talking about his book, CHAMELEO. It's a strange but true story about invisible spies, heroin addiction, and homeland security. We had covered this many years ago, but it was one of my deleted shows, so I wanted to bring him back and go over this again. It basically is covering targeted individuals. This person is a targeted individual, and a little bit more about Robert. He is written stories and articles for numerous magazines. Among them are the Los Angeles Review of Books, let's see what else, the New York Review of Science Fiction, Paranormal Postscripts, Watchdog Magazine. So Robert's pretty much out there. I know he only has phone to call in. He is not here yet, and I hate to say it, but you know how Dr. Betty Martini had a hard time getting in, so we're just going to have to be patient and see if he gets in here. Until then, I'll just jibber jabber along and see if we can keep our fingers crossed and get him into the window. I did give him instructions on calling in through the computer, but he says he doesn't have a headset, so he said he'd have to call in by the phone. And we do know that a lot of my guests have a hard time getting through. Dr. Betty said she had to call 6 times. But here we got a caller here. Hello, Robert, is this you?
Yes, it is. Hello.
Well, you're just in time. I just got done with your intro, so you missed it.
That's fine. I think I know it.
Oh, do you? You know all about yourself?
Yeah, I think maybe.
Well, tonight we're going to go over CHAMELEO. And before we get on to that, why don't you tell us a little bit about the books that you have written since then?
Since CHAMELEO.
Yes.
Well, I have, there's been one book published since CHAMELEO, and that came out in November of 2017. It's called Until the Last Dog Dies, which is a novel. It's fiction as opposed to CHAMELEO, which is decidedly nonfiction. But Until the Last Dog Dies is about a virus that affects only the humor centers of the brain. It doesn't kill you. It just takes your sense of humor away, and it goes pandemic and ravages the globe. And the whole novel is told from the point of view of a stand-up comedian in Los Angeles. And about halfway through the novel, he comes down with the humor virus himself and starts losing his sense of humor. And so it's a parable, not unrelated to CHAMELEO, at least in a metaphorical sense, in the sense of one's, if you take out sense of humor and replace it with the word imagination, someone's imagination being taken away, someone's inner sense of self being taken away, which is what I see happening around the entire globe. And so I think Until the Last Dog Dies is a kind of science fictional parable that perhaps grew out of the experiences of my friend Damien and watching what he went through and going through it myself.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Being a targeted individual definitely takes your sense of humor away.
That's one thing that I desperately wanted to do when I wrote the book, was for it to have a sense of humor, because I know how it can come off. I know how it can seem when someone who has no experience with this stuff listens to people who are targeted talking about their experiences, because often, as you know, they come off as quite desperate and very serious and desperate for people to believe them, which of course they are. But that can come off as crazy when other people are hearing it. almost like the end of Chinatown, if you remember that film where Jack Lemmon is the insider and he's trying to be the whistleblower, and Jane Fonda has him on puts the microphone in his face, and she wants him to get out the information that he knows, and he's coming off as crazy because he's so pent up and he so desperately wants to tell this story, but there's so much information floating around his head he doesn't even know where to begin to create a kind of linear story that anyone could understand it. And so I've seen a lot of targeted individuals. They go on YouTube, they post videos to get their testimony down, which is great. But it can seem, if you're watching it as an outsider and you have no prior knowledge, it can seem like you're listening to a crazy person talking. So when I wrote the book, I think it helped, that I wasn't saying that I was the one being targeted. I was reporting on my friends' experiences, so that was like a little bit of objectivity there. And also, I tried to keep a sense of humor about it because it's very difficult not to see it, at least for me, it's very difficult not to see it without being aware of a certain sense of dark absurdity about the whole thing. I mean, there is something, quote, funny about it, unquote, and by funny I mean not that it's humorous, but in the sense it's absurd. And by absurd I mean a kind of the surreal sense of absurd, the way Andre Breton used the word absurd, theater of the absurd. There's a Kafkaesque kind of humor about it, a black, dark humor, particularly in Damien's story. So I tried to, I'm aware of walking past the pier in Venice Beach and seeing someone standing on a park bench with a bullhorn in his hand yelling about the coming New World Order or whatever it is that this particular person is yelling about, and that kind of approach really pushes people away. So I didn't want to come off as the guy yelling through the bullhorn warning about the coming body snatchers. The book begins with a quote from The Body Snatchers, by the way, the novel by Jack Finney. I wanted it to come off as maybe, if you're skeptical, you can read it. You can read the book on one level as just being about these two guys who are going crazy. And it's just this entertaining, funny story. And you know what? I don't mind if you read it that way, because from my perspective, if you read the book and just you choose to think that the whole thing is not even true, it's just like an entertaining story, that's fine with me, because at least the information is getting into your brain. And the next time, if this happens to your sister or your brother or your best friend or your husband or your wife, you won't be so quick to say, wow, this person's going nuts. Instead, you'll think, wait a minute, I heard this guy on the radio, I remember reading that book, and this is exactly what he was talking about. Maybe he wasn't lying. Because that's part of one of the tools that they use against you, is that they want to make you think that you're crazy, that you yourself are crazy. And so the less that people know about it, the easier it is to pull that con on people, to think, oh, I must be going crazy. Is my house haunted? What's happening here? I'm exhibiting all the classic signs of schizophrenia or paranoia. Everyone's telling me that this isn't happening, so maybe I am crazy. But I hope that if people read the book, CHAMELEO, and if they have no knowledge of this whatsoever, they will come away from it having some information, so that in the future they will be able to recognize it as something other than paranoia, something other than metanoia or insanity.
Right. And and the tragic part about it is when you're first targeted, they do so many terrible gaslighting techniques on you that you're wondering what in the heck is going on, and mostly why and who is this, But to get started, Robert, let's find out exactly what happened in Damien's situation.
Okay, in Damien's particular situation, which began, and I can go into this a little bit further later on and maybe remind me, but I've seen that there's I've talked to many people other than Damien since then, and you can almost categorize them in two different ways. And one person who's targeted where you can absolutely pinpoint the day it started and why. And then there's other cases where you almost don't know why. It seems totally random. In Damien's case, I can pinpoint the day, July 12th, 2003. And I remember that exact day because that was also the day that I went through the third degree of Freemasonry. And I mention that specifically because it ties in later on to the story, as you'll see. And I had just gone through the third degree, and I went home to call Damien. Now, Damien, by this point, I had known him since my 16th birthday. So I had known him for a long time. So I go home to tell him that I had just gone through the third degree and then I was alive and I had not been sacrificed to Baphomet or anything like that. And I called his phone number. I was living in Torrance, which is near Redondo Beach in Southern California. And I called Damien, who at that time was living in the Pacific Beach area of San Diego. And I called him to tell him about this, and he didn't answer. And I called back later on, still no answer, and I left some messages. A few days passed. He still hasn't responded, which was unusual at the time. At that time, he would usually call me back within an hour, within 24 hours or so. A whole week goes by, and I don't hear from him. Finally, after a week, he calls me and tells me this incredible story, or what seemed incredible at the time. Now, in comparison to what happened later, it's almost mundane. But basically, what he said was that he had thrown a party, and I should mention at this point that Damien in the Pacific Beach area was a drug-heavy area, party area, San Diego, and Damien was involved in all sorts of different drugs and illicit substances, and he'd have people come over and just crash on the couch, just sleep on the floor, just random people, really. I mean, it was just the kind of person he was. That didn't bother him at all. So one of these kids that he let come over was this guy named Lee, or rather he said his name was Lee. Later we were told his name was Doyle, so in the book I call him Lee/Doyle. This kid Lee had gone AWOL from Camp Pendleton, but Damien had no knowledge of that whatsoever. He had only been staying on Damien's couch for a couple of nights, but when the kid went AWOL from Camp Pendleton, he stole a bunch of military equipment, a 9mm Iraqi gun taken from the body of a dead Iraqi general, 23 pairs of high-tech night vision goggles, a DOD laptop computer, and a truck. And some of these items he brought into the apartment with him. And so on this one particular night, Damien's having this party, and the kid, Lee, opens up the laptop computer, and this DOD symbol appears on the screen. And immediately Damien thinks, uh-oh, what the hell is this? And he tells the kid, pack up your stuff and get the hell out of here, because that's obviously a bad sign. And the kid goes, no, don't worry about it. They can't track this stuff. And within minutes of that happening, or rather within a very short period of time after him saying that, there's a knock at the door. Keep in mind, there's a whole party going on at this moment. Damien goes to the door. He opens it. There's a woman sitting there, standing there, who identifies herself as Special Agent Lita Johnson of the NCIS. And at this period, I didn't even know what the NCIS was. I had never heard of it. It was before the TV show was on the air, and I just had never heard that particular acronym before. Naval Criminal Investigative Services. So she identifies herself as a special agent. There's two goons behind her, and she wants access to the apartment. Damien, whose father was a narcotics cop, knew his rights very well and said, you can come back and search the apartment when you have a warrant. So she goes, I will come back very soon. And he slams the door in her face, turns around, he tells everyone at the party in his apartment, grab your S and go out the back, meaning grab your drugs and get out of here. They throw their drugs on his carpet and run out the back door. Soon the NCIS comes back. this special agent comes back with her goons, and the San Diego Police Department shows up too, simultaneously. So the way Damien described it, it was as if they were not working together. It was very strange. It was like they were bumping into each other, and like as if both parties had different reasons for being there. No one seemed to care about all the drugs littering the floor. What they most cared about was retrieving these night vision goggles, some of which apparently Lee had brought into the apartment, some of which were not there. That's what they were most concerned about. And they came to the conclusion that Damien was in league with this guy, and that they were selling stolen military equipment to Al-Qaeda or some foreign terrorist organization. So they arrest Damien, they arrest Lee/Doyle, they take them both down to the San Diego jail, and they give Damien the Abu Ghraib treatment for a week. And when I say that, I'm only slightly exaggerating. What Damien described was pretty intense interrogation, constantly questioning him. Damien's in this position of like Joseph K. in the trial, saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not guilty of what you're accusing me of. I've only known this guy for like maybe 48 hours. He was just sleeping on my couch. They didn't want to hear that. They could not wrap their heads around the concept that there was not some sort of connection between Lee and Damien, that Lee had taken this equipment and fled to Damien's house. They want Damien to cooperate. Damien's been in and out of prison his whole life, and as I said, he grew up with a narcotics officer for a father, and did not get along well with him. And B, Damien's just not a very cooperative individual in the first place. So quite frankly, even if Damien had some knowledge, I don't even know if he would have cooperated with them. And so, but in this case, he didn't even know anything. So he said, I don't know anything. It didn't matter. They just kept interrogating. They wanted him to give them information about these night vision goggles, this other equipment, about Lee. After about 7 days, they let him go. They finally let him go. He comes home, he calls me, and he tells me the whole story I just told you. And we both thought, well, wow, that's a weird story. One of those weird incidents, and post 9/11, obviously, some wires were crossed. They figured out that you didn't know anything, and they let you go, and that's the end of it. Or we thought that was the end of it. In fact, that was the beginning of the whole story, because about 2 days later, Damien calls back to tell me that he's being followed all around town, all around Pacific Beach. These people are following him, these jarhead-looking guys. And they're following him down Garnett Avenue in Pacific Beach. They would make themselves very visible and known to Damien. They weren't doing it in a covert way. They weren't doing it in a way to in any way camouflage what they were doing. It was as if they wanted him to see them. And so they would follow him into like the 7-Eleven and then out again. He'd go to his favorite Mexican restaurant down the street. They would sit at the tables all around and make themselves known to him. He would take a bus, and two people would sit behind him, and they would be talking about Damien casually as if he wasn't there.
Right.
Mentioning statistics about his life,
Right.
And then he'd get away from them and go across town, and then two people come by and pick up the same conversation, as the conversation that had started earlier would pick up again, miles away, with two different people. And so it all starts out with what I would refer to as kind of this low-level stuff. I mean, it's very complex, but it's low-level in comparison to what I'm going to describe later.
Now, Robert, let me ask you something real quick,
Yeah.
because I do know that you've done other interviews and you've spoke with other targeted individuals. And do you see a pattern? Like what you're describing is basically like the same kind of thing that was going on with me. People were following me. They were saying gaslighting techniques, and they didn't hide. They wanted to make it visible. Do you see that same pattern with other targeted individuals?
Oh yeah, it's like they follow a script. It's like
Yeah.
someone gives them a manual and says, this is the way to do it. Do it exactly this way.
Right.
And generally, the people who are doing it, the operatives, whether they be civilians or ex-law enforcement or ex-intelligence agents, whoever it is, they're given a manual and they do it exactly this way. And they get really flummoxed when you flip the script on them, or if you suddenly do something that you don't normally do, or something they're not prepared for, that's not included in the bullet points in the manual that they've been given. They get completely, they don't know what to do. They need to like call their superior on the phone and say, what do we do now? What do we do in this situation?
They call their on-site supervisor is what they do. You know, since we had discussed this book the last time, I had a friend that is targeted in Toledo that has a on-site supervisor's house next door to hers, and they would go there to get their checks, and they would have, every 2 weeks, they would go there to get their checks, and they would have a big party, and they'd all get drunk, and she had called me and told me, I found out some information that it's very interesting. She said they were, two of the perps in the backyard were fighting and arguing over who is going to go to the boot camp to be trained next week. The one guy said he couldn't go because he couldn't get a babysitter, and he wanted to switch weeks with this other guy, and they were arguing about it. Well, as she listened, she found out that they go to some closed down military base in Texas somewhere. And they all go there for 2 weeks. That's why they do the exact same thing to everybody and follow the same script. They go there to be trained.
They're indoctrinated.
Yes.
And how did she this was a she?
Yes.
This was a woman? And
yes.
how did she figure out that the supervisor was right next door?
Oh, because her bedroom window, she lives in a neighborhood where it's a house, a driveway, and a house.
Yeah.
And her bedroom window faces that woman's front porch. And she's disabled and in bed all the time. And they target her, they microwave her and everything. And houses are so close together that she can hear everything that's said when people come to this woman's front door. And she had called me and told me about someone that came over there one time that had left the organization and wanted back in and said, I lost my regular job, and tell them I'll do anything they say. I won't give them any hard time anymore, and I'll do anything. Just I got to get back in, you know. And one time they would hit her oxygen tanks with the weapons and turn them off and make her gasp for air. And one time this woman's daughter came home, and she heard her say to her mother, "Oh, I'm so proud of you, of how you worked them weapons on that old bitch next door."
See, that's the one thing that it became clear, and if you read deeper into CHAMELEO, it became clear to both of us that people would get to wherever Damien was going before he got there, and they would tell whoever was there on the other end, if you see this guy coming, he's got red hair, he's driving a black van. If you see him, that guy's a pedophile, or that guy is a Satanist, or that guy is a terrorist. They would poison the well before you even got there. And so I wonder what it is that they tell these people. Like, what is it that they told them about this old woman?
They make a fake file, and see, this is what I found out, because a lot of the times when they're targeting someone, they use a fake file with half-truths or maybe just complete lies. I don't know. I do know what I was told, some things that were in my fake file by a lady that I took care of, that these elderly women that I used to take care of, they went there and approached them, and they tried to show them a fake file on me and tell them that I had done all these horrible things, and that they wanted the one lady to get involved and go through my purse and help them, target me. And she had known me for 18 years, and she said, and this woman was a real I don't take no crap kind of woman, and had to laugh because she did tell me she wanted me not to come over anymore because she didn't want to be in the middle of this stuff. And I totally understood because I knew how they worked. And she said, I got very angry at them. I threw that file back in their face, and I told them that that was a bunch of lies, that she didn't believe one word of it, that she's known me for over 18 years, and there ain't no way that crap that's written in that envelope is true, and whoever's telling you that is lying to you. Basically, she didn't know how targeting worked, but and then she did say that they said I was dangerous.
They might be right, but their definition of dangerous might be different.
They might have right because I get my hands on them, you know. But yeah, that's what it is. They make this fake file up. Now listen to this woman in Toledo. How I figured out because I told her, I said, what are some of the things you know that they say about you? Well, she and also her 86-year-old mother was targeted. And she said, well, for some reason in the fake file, I don't know how she found it out, but she found out in this fake file that they had her and her mother listed as the biggest prostitutes in Toledo, Ohio. And I'm like, what? And I said, she thought it was funny. Why would an 86-year-old woman be the biggest prostitute in Toledo, Ohio? So I said, there's got to be some reason they're trying to put that label on you. So I did some research under the laws of criminal laws in Ohio, and this is what I found. I found out that if they have any reason to suspect you for a sex crime or all different kinds of crimes, but sex crime was one of them, that they can use this kind of technology on you to surveil you. And well, they don't actually say they can target you, but a lot of the weaponry and the the through the wall technology and the listening in and all that, they're by law able to do that. So if you're going to try to bring a case against them for what they're doing to you, that's their out. You follow me?
Yes. It's technically legal.
Yes. Isn't that horrible?
I wish that your friend there had held on to that fake file instead of throwing it back.
Oh no, that would be my elderly friend that I took. Oh, they told her if she told me that they would come after her.
Right. So you have to wonder how many times that's happened in these cases, particularly with Damien. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. The person who's being told these lies would have to be a rare type of person who can see through a con. But most people can't. They're easily hypnotized, and they will believe the first thing they're told.
Yeah.
If they're approached by someone, they say, "Oh, that guy down the block, he's a pedophile," and without even asking for proof, they'll just accept that. And if someone else comes along, and the second piece of information they hear is, "Oh, well, no, I'm not," or "No, he isn't," they dismiss that and just cling to the first thing they heard. So I'm sure that technique works very well. I had heard, I'm blanking now where I read this. It may have been in, there's a lawyer named Brian Glick who wrote a book called War at Home, which was sort of about, came out in the 80s, which is about surveillance of, anti-war activists and things like that, a kind of latter-day COINTELPRO. I think it might have been in that book, but don't quote me on that, where these kinds of techniques were used by the Ku Klux Klan post-Civil War, when African Americans, newly freed slaves, were moving into white areas.
Yeah.
And they would use these whisper campaigns, these kinds of making up lies, trying to push people out by these kinds of psychological warfare techniques would be used to try to drive them out of the neighborhood. So it could be that these gaslighting techniques go way back.
Yes, and they also, this is, if you look up McCarthyism, this is exactly what was done in McCarthyism too. And the thing is once they go around to, and the thing is, before they actually start the gaslighting technique where they start scaring the crap out of you and coming in your home and making themselves visible, they surveil you for a long time and find out exactly who is in your life, and they pick each one of the people that are part of your life off one by one, because they'll check into their background to see if they have any skeletons in their closet that they can use against them to make them not be in your life anymore. So they go through a lot of extensive research to isolate you. And once they have you isolated, then you feel so vulnerable, and and you got to figure you're the only person that's here for yourself, and you got 50, 100 people picking you apart. And they're good at it too, aren't they, Robert?
Well, that was the thing. I think that was unique about Damien's case was I actually believed what he was saying. I had already, and partly that was because I already had some knowledge of, I had never heard of the whole gang stalking thing. In fact, I don't recall that word was even being used yet in 2003. I do recall the term street theater being used to describe this kind of behavior, but I don't recall gang stalking being used until several years later. But at that time, when Damien first started telling me about this, I was aware of the history of MK Ultra and mind control because I had been friends with Walter Boart, who wrote the book Operation Mind Control back in the 70s, which was the premier book, the first really great investigative book about the history of the CIA and mind control, and people like Louis Jolyon West and Jose Delgado and Sidney Gottlieb and all those crazy characters. So I was well aware of the CIA's experiments with LSD and even to some degree with non-lethal weaponry. So when Damien contacted me, I had some sort of a framework to put this in, that this was not entirely unprecedented.
Right.
So when he called me and told me that he was being followed, my initial reaction, I have to admit, was perhaps he's suffering from some sort of drug-induced paranoia. And so I said, well, because initially it sounded outlandish. I mean, he was describing dozens and dozens of people following him around and parking outside his apartment 24 hours a day, shining halogen lights through his bedroom window at 3:30 in the morning, sitting in the parking lot right outside his bedroom window with the car and the headlights going and the car radio blaring all night. Things like that to get him on edge. And so I said, well, why don't you take photographs of the license plates? You see that these cars are following you all around. Why don't you take photographs of the license plates and send them to me? So he did that. And in fact, I reproduced the list of those license plates in the book around page 50 or so, I think. And I had a friend who worked at the DMV in Seattle, so I sent him the list. I said, why don't you run these through the computers and tell me what comes up? And he did, and he said what comes up is nothing. These vehicles, no such plate. They don't officially exist.
Plate. I had mine ran too. I did the same thing. I had mine run by a friend, a girlfriend that was marrying a cop in like 3 counties over, and he came back and told me mine came no such plate. He also told me if he tried to help me, what they were doing to me, they would do to him.
So he was aware of it.
Well, he wasn't aware of it until he took my evidence and looked into it. And then somebody told him what was going on, I guess, and that he better mind his own business.
Where is he a law enforcement officer? Where does he work?
I really don't want to give away his identity because he was kind enough to try to help me.
Sure.
He actually gave me my things back. He had tears rolling down his eyes, and he hugged me, and he said he was so sorry that he could not help me, and he handed me the envelope with the plate things, and he said it came back no such plate, and he said when it does that, that means this is federal.
Right, right, which
That's,
is immediately. The reason I asked about that was because I've often wondered about that regarding local law enforcement. You know, I've met police officers. Some of them are are very well-intentioned people, and then there are others, however, and if you read Mike Rothmiller's book, L.A. Secret Police, you'll learn about the intersection between the intelligence agencies and local law enforcement. Particularly in that book, it focuses on LAPD. But at one point, Damien actually, and this is very, you know that Damien was desperate because he called the police, which is something that Damien would never do. But it was so threatening what was happening, so threatening that he actually, in desperation, called the police, probably against his own better judgment. Two cops show up, one an older guy and one a younger guy. And he said it was very strange interaction. The younger guy actually seemed sympathetic and curious and kept asking him questions, wanting to know more.
Because he didn't know anything about it. Because, see, I think not all of them are involved. Only certain ones are involved. And the ones that don't know anything about it, if they get involved, then they're told to mind their own business, or, you know, or like this guy that tried to help me. And, you know, let me tell you another thing that happened to me. When my swimming pool motor was vandalized, I took it into the pool house place, and I said, I need a new motor. And the guy said, well, what's wrong with your old one? I go, I just need a new one. It's destroyed. He goes, well, how do you know if I can't look at it? And I turned around and I said, listen, you see that thing over there? If I take a sledgehammer to it, can you fix that? And he said, who would do that? And I started telling him what was happening to me. And he stopped me and he said, oh, no, wait, right there. I know all about it. And I said, you do? Because, you know, most people don't know about this. Am I correct? And he said, oh, yeah. He said, I had a good friend who was a judge up on the bench up here, and he tried to expose these bastards, and they kicked him off the bench and ran him out of town.
Mm.
And when I walked out of there, I was stunned, Robert. I was like, oh, my God, if they can do that to him, I don't have a snowball's chance.
Right.
You know,
right.
So that's when that happened, that's when I started realizing there was nowheres to run, nowheres to go for help. Because that's the one thing that targeted individuals have to come to grips with, is that you can't find anybody out there that's going to help you. If it gets in front of a judge and you got all these evidence, and I've seen this with many other targets, it ends up being stamped frivolous and thrown out of court. And I'll tell you another thing, too, that I found out. I found out a lot since we've talked the last time. I was on my motorcycle one day, and I know I can identify perpetrators' houses. You know, I can figure them out. And I knew this woman was a perp. There were telltale signs that she was a perp. And after everybody left this yard sale, she had a little card table. And I sat down next to the card table, and I put my arm on the table, and I looked at her, and I said, so how long you been in the organization? And she thought I was in the organization. And she started rattling off about it. And she said, oh, yeah, I've been in here about 6 years. And I said, who you watching, that creep across the street? And she goes, oh, yeah, that one and one down the road here, you know. And I just got her babbling away, and then I stood up and told her who I was, and I said, and I happen to be a target, not part of the organization, and I mean her jaw just dropped.
And then she ran in and called her supervisor.
Well, you know, it's funny because I identified myself as Bad Baby. You know, I told her, I want you to know that I'm Bad Baby and I do radio shows about this crap, and I got your number, lady.
It's amazing because in terms of the two cops that came over, that when Damien called the cops and they came over, what was interesting in that case is that the young cop, he was interested in hearing more. It was the older cop who kind of shut the younger cop down. It was like, we don't need to hear any more. And Damien got the sense, and this was really early on, Damien got the kind of subliminal sense that the that the older cop knew exactly what was going on.
He did.
He probably did, and it makes me wonder exactly how that process occurs. Like, which cops are chosen to be initiated into all this, and which are not, and then the cops who start out all wide-eyed and innocent, wanting to help people, how are they slowly like dragged down the rabbit hole into this thing? You know.
Yeah, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that one too.
Yeah.
You know. You know,
so,
they have lost all respect from me, Robert. And my husband and I used to donate to the Widows Fund every year, and I used to think they were.
Yeah.
I've lost all respect for them because, you know, I mean, to be part of this and to do this to innocent people and tear people's lives apart and destroy their lives. You know, I don't care what your excuse is. I don't care how much money they offered you, or you're going to get free stuff and your kids are going to go to the best schools. You sold yourself cheap.
Absolutely. And I wonder to what extent, and this is pure speculation on my part because I don't know, but I wonder to what extent some of these, the people who are doing the targeting, who are doing the harassment, who are doing the surveilling, the perps, who among them are being blackmailed themselves, and who among them are themselves controlled? I wonder if some of these people, if these guys aren't guilty of certain crimes for which they would be sent to prison, but instead they're given this deal. Oh, well, why don't you do this instead?
Right. Well, I know there are all different facets of them. I know that some of them are in jail and they get a get out of jail free card to do this, which that would make sense because that would be the type of person that has a criminal background and don't care about anybody else. They would care about themselves, you know. So that would make sense. But I mean, the targeting are in all facets of life. I mean, you're talking the school system, you're talking the electrical system, you're talking the telephone system. There are people involved in all these ambulances, doctors, you know, they're all involved in this. And from what I have found, it's got a huge satanic connection. I mean, you know, and then I have heard some stories where of some of the things that they get. Like, for instance, there was a woman that caught her niece going in her purse. She knew every time her niece came over, she was being perped. So she decided to fish her along and catch her doing it. She did. And it was a young girl, 16 years old, and she broke down into tears. And she said, I want to know exactly what they're giving you to do this, because she was taking keys and, you know, documents out of her purse, like her insurance for her car, and putting expired ones in, you know, just to make you go nuts, you know. And do you know that they sold that little girl off real cheap because they were giving her $100 Walmart gift cards?
That's you know, it's fascinating. I saw someone sent me a link to a clip, and I have no idea if it's legitimate or not, but there was something about it that immediately struck me as, I can believe this. And it was, and perhaps you've seen it yourself. It's this young black kid who's probably maybe a teenager or early 20s. He's sitting on a park bench, and some town in, like, not Southern California, but in maybe Northern California, and the kid's being interviewed by someone, and the kid's claiming that he had worked as a gang stalker. And I'm watching this, and I'm trying to gauge whether or not this is real or if it's a hoax or whatever. And the kid just kind of casually mentions that they would gather them all in a room in City Hall and give them the indoctrination and this is how you do it. And the guys who's off camera says, how are you paid? And he goes, oh, they paid us in Target gift cards.
There you go.
When I heard that, I thought, okay, I can buy that. Anyway, what, this ain't America? Sure, why not? Yeah, they're stalking, surveilling, and doing all this unconstitutional stuff in exchange for Target gift cards. Here's the future, folks. Here's the 21st century for you.
Jeez.
Yeah, Orwell didn't predict that. Aldous Huxley didn't predict that.
Okay, well, let's get back to Damien. Where did we leave off? Where he
Oh, okay. So I had I contacted my friends at the DMV, right, and they ran the plates and said that they didn't exist. They didn't officially exist, which was the first indication to me that, okay, Damien's not suffering from some, meth-induced paranoia. This is actually happening, at least to some extent. So after I found that out, Damien starts describing the harassment's getting stranger and stranger, and during this entire time, this NCIS agent I mentioned earlier, Lita Johnson, she would show up. She would show up at his house. In other words, there's all these cars outside. They're shining halogen lights. They're honking their horns. They're doing all this stuff. Suddenly, the cars will all back out. And then Special Agent Lita Johnson would come driving in with two goons, and she'd go up to the door, knock on the door, and then she would say to Damien, "How you doing? How you been? Having a good time? Have you changed your mind? Would you like to share any information now? Would you like to cooperate?" And then Damien would say, "I can't cooperate because I don't have any information, so no." And then she would say, "Oh, well, interesting. Well, here's my card, and if you change your mind, you call that number anytime you want." And then she gets in the car, drives back, and then immediately all the other cars pull back in, and the harassment starts up all over again.
Yeah.
And this would happen periodically. So then Damien's calling me and telling me that he's being what I would describe as being bombarded by, quote, hallucinations, unquote. In other words, there's a window that looks out onto a parking lot, and there's a wooden fence, and beyond the wooden fence there's a Vons. And one day he opens it up, and outside the window now is not that scene. Now it's like he's looking at an alien planet. It's like a Boris Vallejo painting given 3 dimensions. There's like 3 moons in the sky.
Right.
It's just
That's
surreal.
holographic technology.
That's immediately what I assumed. And Damien's describing how then he goes outside, he opens the door, and of course it's normal,
Right.
But it looks very real through the window.
Right.
And I should also point out that at this time in San Diego, in 2003, in Pacific Beach, there were many corporations, especially SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation. Their headquarters was based right there in Pacific Beach within walking distance of Damien's apartment, and also ATC, American Technology Corporation. Both of these corporations specialized in developing exotic technology, non-lethal weaponry, acoustic bullets, that kind of thing. And exactly this kind of holographic technology within walking distance of where Damien was living. They have since moved out of San Diego, and SAIC has split into 2 different corporations. One maintained the name SAIC, and the other is called Leidos, Leidos, and they moved to Virginia, very close to CIA headquarters. And then he's getting, I was on the phone with him one time, and he describes Damien, as I said, he's been in and out of prison his whole life. He doesn't scare easily. On this particular night when I was on the phone with him, they were using acoustic bullets on him, bullets made of sound, invisible bullets.
Yes.
Shooting through
Where
the window.
It sounds like a loud boom.
Loud boom, and then things would shatter. Things were shattering on his mantle. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that there were poltergeists loose in the house,
Right.
ghosts. Were
what they wanted him to do is they wanted him to call the cops and then say that, and it makes you look crazy, and then they would have committed him.
Absolutely. So instead he called me. And I heard everything shattering. Like I mean, it happened while I was on the phone with him, and everything was shattering around him, and he sounded like a scared 8-year-old girl. I mean, he was in the fetal position on the floor with the phone with the receiver in his hand, shaking. And he couldn't believe it. And then even stranger things started happening. He described that the inside the apartment began to grow and shrink. So he would come into his apartment, and the apartment would look larger on the inside than it appeared from the outside, kind of like Dr. Who's TARDIS. And other people would come over and notice the same thing. They would say, Damien, is your house growing? Or is it shrinking? And I recently did an interview with a guy, and it's one of those unfortunate moments where you're being interviewed for about 45 minutes and you realize that the person interviewing you hasn't heard a word you said? Because at this point, he asked me, he goes, did you ask Damien to go buy a tape measure? And I go, why? And he goes, well, to prove that the house was growing. And I go, the house wasn't literally growing.
No.
It was the technology that was being used made it appear as if the inside of the house was growing. It was not literally growing. And he was like, oh.
And see, people don't realize that they have this technology. And, you know, when I had a guy come over here to remodel my kitchen, and I started telling him about the technology that was being used on me, and he had a United States Marine Corps hat on, right? And he's just standing there looking at me with his jaw hanging down in shock. And then we had to go up to Lowe's to look at some cabinets and that, and my nephew brought him over. He gets in the truck with my nephew, and they follow me up to Lowe's. And he's, you know, talking to the salesman, and me and my nephew are standing there, and my nephew says, Auntie, you scared the crap out of that guy. I go, what do you mean? And he said, how in the world does your aunt know all this? And he goes, because she's smart. Why? And he goes, because everything she's telling me is highly top secret crap. No one's supposed to know this.
That sounds like when I was right before I decided to write the book, because I started writing it in the summer of 2010, I believe, and you know, many years, because obviously Damien, all that happened in 2003, 2004, and I went through a period of not wanting even to think about it. And it just so happened I was teaching a literature science fiction class, and after the class, a guy stopped me and he said, hey, he goes, I wanted to ask you a question. Can you think of anything that is considered to be science fiction by most people, but it really isn't? And immediately I started telling him the story, and he goes, wow, can you tell that story in class tomorrow? I go, if you remind me, I will. So I did, and it just so happened that there was a guy in the class who was ROTC. He'd come to class every day in full military gear, you know, uniform. He would always call me sir, you know, and I tell the whole story about Damien, and everyone looks gobsmacked. Many of them look very skeptical. This guy, he just raises his hand, and he says, sir, I can't say anything specifically, but everything you're saying aligns perfectly with things that I myself have been taught and have seen while in the military. And, like, that's all he said. He wouldn't say anything more, and the people who seemed skeptical suddenly looked less skeptical. But the technology, yes. So not only is the inside of the house growing and shrinking, et cetera, other things start happening, like people. Damien calls me to tell me that there are people in his house who are physically interacting with him, but he cannot see them. They would push him over, talk to him while he was there, but he couldn't see them.
Yeah.
Sometimes he would sense that they were there. Telltale signs of, you know, I mean, the sound of someone walking, but there's no one there. And
that's the cloaking device they use.
Yes.
You know, I've seen that on Facebook. Have you seen that? Where it's a cloth and they hold it up. Someone's holding it up like to their chest, and you can't see their body from there down. Then if they put it over them, you can't see them at all.
Okay. I have specific information about that specifically, which I will get to later on. But remind me to talk about that.
Yeah.
So,
I've had that used on me. They actually walked right past me into my house and stole some things. Walked right out.
I've since spoken to many people who've had the same experience.
Oh yeah.
And they at one point, Damien was in the bathroom and he was moving the medicine cabinet on his. You know how they have the mirrored medicine cabinet in the bathroom? He was opening that, and as the mirror was in motion, he actually got a sight of one of these people behind him. And he described them as being very small, a very small person. So we humorously started referring to them as invisible midgets, but actually it makes some sort of logical sense that if you had a suit and you wanted people to get in and out of places, you would want to give it to small, slender people, you know.
Right.
And so.
Or could it possibly have been a child?
It could have been.
Because they do use children too.
You know what's interesting? I once heard, this was a long time ago, I heard Whitley Strieber being interviewed. This was back in the 90s, and something you just said just triggered that memory. I heard him being interviewed, and he just mentioned, just nonchalantly, you know, Strieber wrote Communion, right, the book about alien abductions, right? He claims he was abducted by aliens, etc. He mentions offhandedly that he knew a guy in the intelligence in some intelligence agency who told him that their code word for the quote aliens was that they called them the kids, capital K, the kids, and I thought maybe they call them the kids because that's what they are. You know, in these like articulated, you know, sophisticated costumes, you know, go in there and scare that guy, you know. But anyway, so he, and then other times he would see them was the technology would break down. He would see them as these little like auras in the air. So he would see a kind of outline and these little dots in the air. Kind of like what people who suffer from intense migraines sometimes describe auras in the air.
Right.
That's what he would see.
Well, you know, it depends on the conditions. Now, I do know, like, if there's steam in the room, you know, like if they were in a bathroom that's steamed up, you will get a glimpse of the outline of them. Also, I know that infrared cameras, and that's probably why they were so hell-bent on getting those goggles, because they were infrared. Infrared cameras will detect it, because I have infrared cameras on my front yard, and my camera that actually videos, you know, and goes into a DVR, picked it up of them coming out from behind my pine tree, and you could see the jagged edge of the cape. You could see the cloaking cape. You couldn't see a person. You could just see this cape, and you could see it going back and forth with the shoulders where they were walking.
Yes, that in fact there was one point where Damien was on the beach in San Diego, and he could see tracks forming in the sand as if there were a vehicle there, but he couldn't see the vehicle. So it wasn't just people.
Yes.
They were following around with this invisible car, essentially, is what you could say. And then meanwhile, while all that's going on, he's describing there was one night where they projected the shadow on the wall. He was laying in bed, and they projected the shadow like a silhouette of a hand holding a gun, and the shadow would tilt down until the shadow of the gun was like pointing at his head, and and then it would disappear. Or one night he saw this black amorphous ball of energy just crawl across his bedroom floor, and his leather jacket was on the floor, and the black energy entered the jacket, and then the jacket started to move across the floor on its own. So in the midst of it, as that's going on, then Lita Johnson would come back. Oh, are you ready to cooperate? And you would say no, because I don't know anything. And finally, I said, you know what? Because as I said, I've known Damien since I was 16. So you could ask me at this point, well, you didn't actually see any of this, right? I said, well, okay, yes, I'm describing to you what Damien described to me. I did not see it. However, and I do know that, Damien would be often on heroin. Heroin's not a hallucinogen, A. B, I was intimately familiar with the unique brand of Damien's madness. I mean, he was not a normal person, certainly. He was not a 9 to 5, I go to work in the office and sit there and stare at a wall all day until they tell me I can go home. He definitely was not that type of person. So I was used to Damien's unique brand of craziness, and it was not the type of craziness that would manifest itself in making up whole scenarios and people that didn't exist, and nonetheless predicting that people would want some sort of evidence of this. I said to him, I go, the special agent, she gave you her phone number. Why don't you give me the phone number and I'll call her. I'll talk to her. So he does, and I called her. I called her on the phone. She answered, "Hello, this is Special Agent Lita Johnson of the NCIS." You know, I still have her. The editor asked me to take. I originally put in a footnote her phone number and the address, and the editor suggested we not do that, and that was probably a good idea.
Yeah, they probably would have targeted you.
But I call her, and I go, "Hi, this is Robert Guffey. I live in Torrance. My friend Damien in San Diego claims you're following him." And she immediately was very disturbed that I was asking her questions about this. She seemed really affronted that I would even dare to ask her anything about it. And she immediately went into like lawyer mode. In fact, I put the whole transcript of the conversation in the book. Everything she said was a kind of CYA, cover your ass kind of response. So I asked her, I go, is my friend being followed? And she said, "Oh, no one in my agency is currently following your friend." It was said as precisely as that. It was almost like this prearranged lawyerly kind of response, I mean, of course, technically probably correct. Yes, no one in her agency was following him.
No, it was in the targeted individual group that she contacted.
Right. they contracted it out to someone else, either to another agency or to civilians or whatever. So yeah, technically, probably she's correct. She wasn't lying. And then I asked her. I go, "Well, okay. So are you planning on arresting him for anything?" And she says, "No, we are not currently considering arresting your friend." And I said, "So it's okay if he leaves town?" And then she goes, "I wouldn't suggest that." And I said, "Well, if you're not planning on arresting him, why wouldn't it be okay if he leaves town?" She said, "It just might complicate matters later on." Okay. So it didn't end well. She implied that, Damien was crazy and really didn't know what he was talking about. And yet, here she is on the other hand saying he shouldn't leave town. It might complicate things later on. Now, I was in the mindset at this point, as a lot of people are at the beginning, that if he left town, everything would stop. And a lot of people make that mistake. I met a guy who was a high-powered attorney from Minnesota. He had his own law firm, a very successful guy, and he had to leave everything behind. He had represented an African-American Muslim woman against the St. Paul, Minnesota Police Department in a harassment lawsuit, and he won. He won the case for her. And soon after that, all this stuff started happening to him, including the invisibility, cloaking stuff was happening to him too.
Yeah.
Everything. He got on a plane and flew to Long Beach. He visited me in my office at work to tell me about this. He heard my interview. He was like, "This is the first guy who who seems to understand what's happening to me."
Exactly.
They took everything away from him. That's a whole other story. Maybe I can get to that.
And
later on.
this is another reason why you can't get an attorney to help you, because they know darn well if they get involved, they'll be targeted. But see, that guy, he didn't know anything about being targeted until it happened to him, probably.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He was he himself is an attorney. He's coming to me for help. I'm not an attorney. How would I know? So yeah, exactly. And he literally had to leave everything behind. He was living on the beach in Santa Monica, and everything he owned was in a suitcase. But so
they're real good at destroying lives, aren't they, Robert?
That's what they get off on. They're almost like psychic vampires. That's what they feed off of. And Damien at one point told me, he goes, "I almost get the feeling that it's like they wanted to commit suicide, or I can almost imagine these guys in their white vans, putting bets. Do you think he'll kill himself today?"
Yep.
Oh, well,
That's exactly what they want. They want to push the person to the point where they feel they have no life anymore, that there's no way out of this, and they can't take it anymore. And and then they want to push you over the edge. Exactly. So that's the worst thing about it is destroying your life, and then that you got to figure out some way to get a grip and know that you can overcome it to a point, and still have some kind of a life. Just don't fall into the delusional trap. But, you know, when we were talking about the cloaking, I had a friend in Washington State that she has a octagon house, and she's targeted, and she has like 3 floors in this house, and the 3rd floor has a kitchen and bathroom and everything, and so she pretty much stayed on the 3rd floor, and, you know, in the bottom 2 floors, she just would go down there whenever, you know. But they were coming in her house. She would be up on the 3rd floor, and they were cloaked, and she had plastic down on the floor that she was painting downstairs. And she had called me, and she said, someone's in my house. And I said, how do you know? She said, I'm hearing them walk across the plastic that's on the floor where I'm painting. And then I saw the plant. She had like a ficus tree at the end of her staircase, and she saw them brush against the plant. And she had a dog. Her dog was very friendly. Her name was Daisy. And I said, well, just keep Daisy by you, and Daisy will let you know if they're in that room. So later on that night, she called me, and she said, oh, my God. She says, what do I do? They're in this room. I know they're in this room. I said, how do you know they're in the room? She said, Daisy started growling. I was sitting here on my computer. Daisy started growling, and then somebody went shh to the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, I said, well, you can do what you want, but if it was me, I'd grab that table lamp and I'd start swinging it around in a circle until I watched somebody.
Well, that's the thing. These invisibility suits, they do not make you bulletproof.
Exactly. Exactly.
They would come in the room while Damien was having sex with his girlfriend. He was aware that they were there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
you know, the thing is that unfortunately, they finally did something to her because she had called me and said that they knocked her out one night and she woke up groggy and she could hear the water in her bathroom running, and she saw a man in there rinsing a syringe off and looking at it in the light. And after that happened, she had a stroke.
Well, in fact, as all this stuff was happening to Damien, the thing that finally convinced me to help him to get out of there was because he calls me. There was a period of time where he just went off the air. Like I didn't hear from him for several days, and I was actually quite concerned. Finally, he called me and he told me that he'd had a strange, what he called a waking dream. And I know this was no dream and it was no nightmare because, as I said, Damien's an experienced heroin addict. He's not afraid of needles. And in this, quote, dream, he was sitting in his living room, and then he sees himself like falling asleep, and then these guys came in and then put a needle in his arm. And he basically had missing time. I mean, he didn't even know what had happened after that. And it was at that point that it just so happened that he had run into this beachcomber guy on Pacific Beach who was trying to get rid of this van, this black van. So Damien did not ask me to do this. I did this entirely on my own. I wired him through Western Union $500 because he was going to buy the van, and then someone stole his wallet. He had the plan to go and buy that van to leave, and someone stole his wallet. So I wired him $500, Western Union. I called him, and I go, there's $500 waiting for you at Western Union. And Damien goes, oh, my God, I can't believe it. Thank you. And I'm about to, if you've ever wired someone money through Western Union, you have to give them a code. And then they give the code to the person, and then they give you the money. So I was about to tell him the code. He goes, wait. Don't give it to me now. He was concerned that whoever's listening on the phone would go and get the money before he could go get it. So he goes, let me pack up all my stuff. I'll call you back in 2 hours. You give me the code. Okay. So I tried to call him back in 2 hours. We're talking. I'm about to give him the code, and the line goes dead. I call him back. I'm about to give him the code. I get out one syllable. The line goes dead. This happens 8, 9, 10 times in a row. And finally, I remembered something that was unique about collect phone calls. If you call someone collect, there's a moment when the person on the other end is asking the other person, will you accept the charges? During that moment, you can briefly hear each other. So as the woman is saying to Damien, will you collect the charges, I yell out a hint. and I knew that I heard him laugh, and immediately the line went dead. And I knew that he knew what it meant. I can't say what it is because it's pornographic in nature, but I knew that he would immediately recognize what the hint was, and he would know what the code word was. So he went down to Western Union. He gets the money. He goes. He buys the van. He throws all his stuff into the back of the van, and he takes off. And he drives from. He drives out of San Diego. He left a note on the door saying, "I've gone west," which would be right into the ocean. And oh, by the way, when he told the landlord that he was leaving, he said the landlord could not look more relieved.
Yeah.
So over the course, this all begins in July, 2003. He leaves in around February, I think, of 2004. So all that time, every single person who lived in that apartment complex moved out and was replaced with new people. And I think the landlord was, I don't know if he was being paid. I mean, obviously these people had to pay rent, but it's a limitless black budget, so I don't think that would be a problem with paying the rent in the entire apartment complex. But this landlord was just absolutely so happy that Damien was leaving. And so Damien leaves. He calls me about a day later, and he tells me, and keep in mind, it's early 2004. This is before drones are all over the place. Now you see them flying around all over, and they're getting shot out of the sky over Dodger Stadium. He tells me that these circular little, like, flying saucer-looking things are following him and had followed him all the way out from San Diego and all the way up into Texas, and he drives towards a place called Winona, Kansas. And on the way there, he stops off in a bathroom in Minnesota, and he goes and he's washing his hands after having gone to the bathroom, and a guy he's never seen before comes up to him and also turns on the sink right next to him. And the guy turns to him and says, "Listen, if you would just give all the stuff back, all this would end." And he said it not in a kind of like ominous way. It was more like a pleading, like, "Please just give the stuff back. Like, I'm tired of following you." Like, it was that kind of a tone. And a second after the guy says that, another guy comes in, grabs the second guy by the collar and just kind of drags him out as if the guy had broken protocol or something. It was one of the few times, in fact, one of only 2 times where anyone involved in this actually admitted, yes, we are actually following you, we are actually surveilling you, because of course the whole point is to drive you crazy and make you question yourself. And I don't think the guy was supposed to go in and say that. So this spooks Damien, and he leaves the bathroom, he gets into his van, he drives through, his van breaks down right outside Winona, Kansas, and these 2 good old boys pick him up off the side of the road, and Damien tells them the whole story, everything, a shortened version of what I've just told you. And they are very skeptical, and they drive him back to their house in the middle of nowhere, and they call me at 10 o'clock at night, and I hear this guy pick up the phone. The phone rings, I pick it up, and I hear a guy go, "Hello? Hey, you Professor Guffey?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You know Damien?" I go, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, what is it now? And the guy goes, "We picked him up off the side of the road. He's got this crazy story. He's being followed by these, invisible midgets and flying saucers and stuff. What is this?" And I go, "No, it's absolutely true. It's not a fairy tale. He's not crazy." I lay out the whole thing. I explain it to him. As I'm talking to them, I hear in the background the second guy, the 2 guys who picked him up, the guy who I'm not talking to on the phone, the second guy who's in the background yells out, "Hey, Jeb," or whatever the hell his name was, "get over here, look over here through the window." And he describes to me on the phone that there's a small circular device hovering outside the house. And it followed them from the broken down van all the way to the house where they had taken Damien. They couldn't believe it. They were amazed. And after that I said, "Well, can you give my friend some gas and fix his van?" And they did. And he then drove to this little town, Winona, Kansas, where there's like 100 people who live there. And when he got there, the harassment stopped. And I don't know if it was just, sometimes they do that, they pull back, give you a false sense of security, and then it starts up again, or it was so small that a black van coming in with a parade of jarheads following behind them would be just too obvious. Or, as I mentioned before, the optical camouflage technology does not prevent you from getting shot by lead projectiles, and there are a lot of people in Winona, Kansas with guns. So he stayed there for about 3 months or so, and he was kind of able to collect his thoughts, gather his thoughts together, and he goes online. He starts looking around for anything to figure out what the hell the invisibility stuff was all about. And he finds this guy named Professor Tashi, who invented something called the invisibility cloak, which is what you described earlier. The invisibility cloak, it makes you invisible from one angle. And so when Damien saw that, he goes, that doesn't quite look like what I saw, because what he saw was like 360 degrees. You know, it wasn't just one angle.
Right.
So he finds this site called CHAMELEO.net, which is, by the way, I looked at it a few days ago, and it's actually not online at the moment. But CHAMELEO.net, which is the website of a guy named Richard Schoengert. And Damien read all the information. He goes, what this guy's describing sounds more like what I saw. It was like 360 degrees. It wasn't just from one angle. You need to look at it. So I go and I look at it, and synchronicity plays a huge role in the story. So I go on the website, and I'm amazed to see that this guy, Richard Schoengert, not only is he a scientist, he has top secret clearance, he has a personal side project about optical camouflage technology, but he describes himself as a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in Long Beach. And I'm a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in Long Beach, and I realize I'm in the same lodge as this guy. I must have met him at some point. So I email him and I go, hey, I'm in your lodge in Long Beach. I'm a writer. I've interviewed all these people. I'd like to interview you about your technology. And he writes back, and maybe because I was a fellow brother, he writes back and he says, sure, meet me at the lodge on Saturday and we can talk. So I tell Damien. Damien drives down specifically to meet him. I go to the lodge on Saturday morning. I meet Richard. I realize that I had met him before, but never formally introduced to him. I had seen him on the stage performing the Scottish Rite rituals, but I didn't know what his name was. And I certainly didn't know he was, tinkering with optical camouflage technology in his spare time. Me and Damien, I introduce him to Damien. We take him to lunch at George's Greek Cafe in Long Beach, and then we take him to my office on campus, and we sat down and I interviewed him. We interviewed him for like 2 hours or more. And I had no idea if this was going to lead or connect back to anything that Damien had experienced. In fact, my expectation was that it was not connect in any way. But as Richard starts talking, everything he says matches with what had happened before. He mentions that he had that a corporation called SAIC in San Diego had approached him 10 years earlier. So 10 years before, we're interviewing him in 2006. So 10 years before 2006, he had been approached by SAIC and the Navy about his technology. And he said it was very strange. They came, he took him out to the lab that he shares with Dr. Lev Berger, who's a well-known physicist, who was his partner in this optical camouflage project. They brought the Navy out to the lab in Hemet. They brought SAIC out to the lab. They showed them what they could do with a small-scale model. And they seemed very interested, like they wanted to collaborate, and then suddenly they just disappeared, and never. They thought they were going to fund the project. They just disappeared. Then he tells me that he's initiated a FOIA request. I haven't said anything yet about Damien's experiences, nothing, and he just volunteers that he's initiated a FOIA request because he thinks that the military has stolen his technology and is.
They probably did.
They
probably did. And it was the Navy that did the Tesla experiments, and
that's true.
Also, the house up on the corner that was involved in watching me. They were always acting like there was no one in there, and I knew someone was in there because when it snowed, you'd see tire tracks going in and out of the garage. And so I kind of, when I started figuring out how to figure out what was going on. They surveil you, you need to surveil them. And so I started watching them to find out, well, this house is suspicious and what's going on. So whenever someone was around that house, I started watching. And I ended up buying these binoculars that take pictures. And so here I am watching in the summertime, and this white van kept pulling in, and all these people in the same color clothes, blue pants and light blue shirts, would get out and start trimming the bushes and riding the lawnmower and sweeping the drive. And I'm like, who are these people? So I come up in my corner through the brush. I'm hiding in the weeds there watching them. And the guy driving the mower turns the mower towards me, and the front of his shirt said, United States Navy.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact,
everybody has the United States Navy come do their yard work, don't they?
Before he met me and Damien, Richard and Lev Berger, his partner, had gone to a Spa War conference, which is a conference for basically proposed new developments in warfare and technology, and Richard had done a whole presentation about his CHAMELEO project, and a woman stands up in the front row, and she goes, wait a minute, you can't be talking about this. And then Richard goes, what do you mean? This is while the presentation's happening. She goes, you can't be talking about it. This is all top secret information. And he says, no, this is my technology. I invented it. She doesn't realize she's talking to the guy they stole it from. she thinks that this guy is sort of, telling tales out of school. That obviously, because she can tell he knows. So obviously, he must be part of the project. And so finally, the guy who supported Richard being there, he comes out and he says, listen, just let him finish the presentation, then you can talk to him afterwards. You can debrief him afterwards. So she goes in a huff. She says, okay. He completes the presentation, and she and a bunch of goons come up to him afterwards and say, as if they're going to arrest him. And she goes, can you prove that you have clearance for this information? And he goes, I don't have clearance for the information. He has top secret clearance, or he had until he retired, but not for other projects, not for this. This is a personal project of my own. I'm not being sponsored by any corporation or anything. This is just me and my partner. And she goes, well, can you prove that? He goes, I can go show you the patent, out in the car. He shows her the paperwork, the patent number, the date on it, and finally she realizes what's going on, and she's like, oh, okay. And they let him go.
Any money when he showed it to them, they probably had hidden cameras on themselves, and they videoed everything, and they stole his technology.
Yes, well, as Richard himself, in fact, Richard appeared on Jeff Brady as a show called In Other News on WBAI in New York. He appeared on Jeff Brady's show only a week ago talking about his technology, and he said during that interview that the military can take whatever they want. It's completely legal if it's for national security reasons. Any invention that you put a patent on, they can take it and use it, and they don't have to tell you, and they don't have to pay you either.
and they can experiment on you, and they can target you. And I did a show on patents, and there is an executive order giving them the right to experiment on us and without our consent. So that again is how they get away with all this. They have written their own laws to give themselves their own out.
During the interview when I was talking to Richard before I even had Damien tell him his story, Richard just volunteers. He goes, oh yeah, one of the uses for this is psychological warfare. That's in the original patent that you could use this psychological warfare. And I should point out that Richard, Richard's a good guy. Like he didn't make this thinking, oh, they're going to target U.S. civilians. In his mind, it was they're going to target, enemies of the United States. So he had in the patent, yes, this could be used for psychological warfare purposes. You could make someone think they're seeing things that aren't even there. You could make them think they're going crazy. It's in the patent. And I mentioned to him, I say, could you use this technology to make a room look like it's growing or shrinking? He goes, oh yes, that's in the patent too.
Oh my God! They had to make Damien feel better when he met the person that invented this stuff.
You know what? It's interesting. I thought that it would too. I thought that he would feel better knowing that he wasn't crazy. But I noticed that he seemed to go in a bit of a shock or a depression afterwards.
Well, yeah, because he's, well, I can see it from both ways. Yeah, I would feel better knowing that, this is where it's coming from now. It all makes sense. But then again, you also feel a loss because this has destroyed my life.
I think that what it was easier to think that he was going crazy. I mean, that's easier to deal with. You can like take meds. For the other thing to be true, what do you do about that?
Yeah. Like I said, it's heartbreaking. Have you? Let me ask you something, Robert. Have you ever heard of Mark Rich?
The Mark Rich who Bill Clinton pardoned and then he moved to Switzerland? That Mark Rich? Or?
No, this guy is a targeted individual. He wrote a book called The Hidden Evil.
I have, yes, I recognize that title and the author, but I've not read the book, nor do I know anything about it.
Well, you can Google his name. I will, you know what? I will put the link for his information in your Facebook message.
Okay.
You need to go read his information because when you were talking about the landlord and how he's part of it, Mark Rich actually interviewed some perps, and he talks about how they told him straight up they've got the keys, they run the ambulances, and blah blah blah. I mean, he goes into a lot of information that I don't know if you're still talking to Damien. Are you still talking to him? Is he still going through all this?
Yes, he's still going through all this. He called me on Christmas Eve, and in fact, he recently got kicked out of the apartment he was living in. He told me this is interesting. He was making this is just recently that this happened. He was making iced tea. You know how you brew the tea and then you set it on the windowsill, for hours. Okay, so he was waiting for it to be done so he could drink it. Suddenly, without wanting to do this, he grabs the jar of iced tea, he unscrews it, and then he pours the whole thing over his own head. He didn't want to be doing it, and he described how strange it was for his arms to be doing something he didn't want to do.
Right.
Then, not long after that, he was sharing an apartment with a couple of other people. He just, in the middle of the night, just erupts out of his bed and propels himself into the wall, and the computer just goes like crashing onto the floor. His roommates come in. What the hell just happened? He goes, I just slipped and fell. How do you explain? I was just propelled across the room.
Unfortunately, he's been implanted, Robert. Because there is a target that I know in Mount Clements that they committed her, and after she was committed, she came out and she has the same things happen. There's some type of implant that they can put in you that they can take control of your arms and legs.
Well, that what's so ominous about that is what it makes me think of is all these mass shootings and like the guy, Stephen Paddock in Las Vegas, the FBI, they just released a report finally. We don't know why he did it. That's the final FBI report. We don't know why he did it.
So the guy here in Michigan, that Uber driver that shot 9 people, he said that the Uber, when he opened the Uber app, the devil was in the app instructing him what to do, and he don't remember doing any of it. They just sentenced him to life in prison.
Right, Jason Dalton. Yes.
Yes.
That was in Kalamazoo.
Yes.
The examples are endless. In fact, the guy just recently, the case in Thousand Oaks, Ian David Long, that guy was trained at Camp Pendleton in San Diego.
What a matrix that we live in, Robert.
Oh yeah. I mean the San Diego connections to a lot of these mass shootings is amazing. The woman who shot up the YouTube headquarters, she drove there from San Diego, and there was a shooting at a mall in I think Oregon, where there was some San Diego connection to that one. Keep that in mind. Like watch how that happens. There's often some sort of San Diego connection. And then what's amazing and the whole ironic aspect of all this, of course, is what we talked about earlier. Criminals being let out of prison so they can go stalk people. So you have, it's like that scene in JFK where Kevin Costner says, black is white and white is black. Everything's upside down. So you have criminals using black budget money to stalk and surveil innocent people who are being accused of being criminals.
Here you go, up and down and black and white. Yes, yeah. I totally can relate. Well, please tell Damien that, my heart goes out to him, and I totally understand, because I have walked a mile and do walk a mile in his shoes. And tell him I said to keep the faith, and that he's not the only one that's suffering, and that he, I feel his pain.
I will absolutely pass along that message.
I say a lot of times I don't want to live this anymore, and when is it going to stop? And I've asked the Lord, when is this going to stop? And he says, when I get them all at once. I don't know what that means, but I'll tell you what, I can't wait till he gets them all at once.
Well, if there's one ray of hope in here at all, is that I think if you read CHAMELEO, you read the whole thing from cover to cover, you can kind of back engineer it in a way, and you'll see the moments where Damien will do something unexpected, or he'll flip the script, and they'll be confused and not know what to do. There's one point in the book where I describe how he suddenly got the idea to climb up onto the roof of his apartment building, and when he climbed up on the roof, he could immediately see where all the gang stalkers were. By getting up onto another level, by going higher than them, he was able to look down and immediately see, oh, there's a cluster of them, and there's another cluster of them scurrying around over there.
Here's a little tidbit of information you can give him. He can go online and get a parabolic microphone for $58. That is phenomenal. You just put the headphones on. You can plug it into a voice-activated tape recorder. It will pick up what people are saying 3 football fields away, and you can find out a lot of stuff by listening to them.
That's a very good tip. There's a site called fightgangstalking.com, and there's an interesting little article there it's called Tactics for Fighting Back. And I thought it was interesting because it was just really like a series of rather mundane things you can do. You don't need. At one point, I was being interviewed by this guy, and it was the same guy who asked me if I had told Damien to go buy a tape measure. And he said, "Did you have Damien go out and buy surveillance equipment so that you could videotape this and get evidence of it?" First of all, this was 2003. Damien didn't have money for food. He didn't have money for high-tech surveillance equipment, and then he asked me, well, did you photograph him? And I said, well, no. I mean, basically what you get is you get photographs of a bunch of people standing outside. Even if you had that, what are you going to do? Show it to people and go, oh, look at these people. It proves
a lot of people say get cameras. To me, you know how much money I spent on cameras that they just destroyed, and then I found out that my cameras were being turned off. They have to turn the darn thing off and then turn it back on.
Right. That's interesting. That actually had not occurred to me. But yes. So there's a series of kind of like little just mundane things that you can do. I mean, Damien explained to me at one point he went into San Francisco, and he realized, he was getting good at this point. This is probably like around 2011, maybe 2010, and he told me how he went into San Francisco, and he immediately could tell that this guy was gang stalking him, this guy and his girlfriend, and he could suss out that the guy was the stalker, the one who was being paid to do this, and the girlfriend was kind of tagging along. So instead of like running away from the situation, he just immediately approached them and started hitting on the girlfriend, and the girlfriend was responding. And the guy was getting really nervous because he wasn't supposed to interact with Damien at all, but Damien just came and interacted with him.
Yeah, they don't like it when you flip the script on them. They do not like it.
They do not. I describe in the book there was one point where, and this was early on where this happened. There was a guy who was following around all over the place, and Damien leads him into like an AM PM, and he buys a big like 30-ounce slushy, and he's walking across the street. The guy's following him. Damien suddenly turns around and he flings the entire contents of the thing in the dude's face. The guy does nothing, and Damien called him a homophobic word that usually makes men angry. And in this case, the guy did nothing. Particularly this guy, he looks like a military-looking, testosterone-poisoned white dude, and he's just had liquid splashed in his face. He's been called this homophobic word, and he does nothing. He just stands there staring. I mean, obviously, the normal reaction would be
I had them quite approaching me, like in stores, because, I had them following me one day, and then I got out of my truck, and these two biker guys were going, "Where is she? Where is she?" Then they saw me, they go, "Oh, there she is." And I got to the point where I was so fed up with it, so I just said, "Oh, you want to play? Okay, we'll play. Follow me." So they did. They followed me in the store, and I took them down a couple aisles, and then I took them to the Kotex aisle. Here, these two burly biker guys are trying to browse in the Kotex. And so the one guy had this T-shirt on, and I knew what it was because I've rode motorcycles all my life. It was a Polka Run T-shirt. So I played stupid, and I walked up to him, and his eyes got really big, like, "Here she comes," I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, What? And I said, "Your shirt. What does that mean?" And he says, "Oh, that's Polka Run. We get cards and we go to all these different bars, and then we go to the last bar and we drink beer and look at the pretty girls." I said, "Oh, is that what you need the Kotex for?" And the other guy started laughing. He goes, "She got you good, dude." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like fun." And I just walked away.
There's a point where Damien describes in the book, it's one of the transcribed sections where I actually transcribed the conversation between me and Damien, and he's describing how he was in a line at a grocery store, and he realized that the guy behind him was stalking him. So Damien gets out of line, and he grabs one of those like aluminum, those tubes of aluminum foil, they're long rods that have aluminum foil around them, and he gets up behind him and he just starts poking the guy in the butt. And the guy's not doing anything. He's not doing anything. He's just standing there like just enraged but not doing anything. And I wonder, to what extent are they they must have something really heavy hanging over their head where they're told, do not engage no matter what they do, because
I think some of them are mind controlled, to tell you the truth. And I think some of them, they get into it, and then when they find out what they're really into or get so deep in it, they can't get out, because there's one guy, I can't think of who his name is, but he said he was a perp and that he couldn't stomach it anymore, and he's out there whistleblowing, and they have targeted the crap out of this guy. And he's got a YouTube video. I'll try to find it and give it to you. But he actually talks about all of it, and and how he's being targeted, and very interesting video.
There's a little post that I actually included as a footnote in the book, because there was this one site where someone solicited perps to come and comment on this board. And most of it I thought was either BS or was people making stuff up. I mean, obviously you don't know, but there was one particular one that was just like signals and noise to me. It just seemed real, and so I actually included it. And I don't know for sure, but it was just interesting the way he described his existence, was that he was almost worse off than the people being targeted. He was more controlled than the people being targeted. He had a lot of money. He couldn't spend it. He was living out of hotels and cars, and just a real sad existence. I'm not really weeping any tears for him, but it's just interesting when you think about it that these people have created a situation for themselves where they've made themselves prisoners.
Right. Well, this guy in his interview, he says that when he first got into it, they promised him the world. they told them, oh, your kids will go to the best schools. You'll never have to want for anything. You'll have women. You'll have, nice cars. So, yeah, they really do dangle a carrot in front of them.
Yeah, a real Faustian bargain, It's unfortunate that people are so hypnotized and could fall for something like that. You think if you'd been around the block even a couple of times, you'd see through that, pretty little story. And
well, you know what? A lot of the society nowadays is so materialistic that it's easy to bite that carrot, isn't it?
There's a writer named John Rappaport who wrote a book called The Secret Behind Secret Societies, and in that book is an interview with a hypnotherapist named Jack True. That's his actual name, a hypnotherapist.
I think
he's
in our window right now, Rappaport.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Excellent. In The Secret Behind Secret Societies, which is an excellent book, and everyone should read it, there's this interview with Jack True, and he says something that's amazing. The hypnotherapist says he has like a hypnotherapy practice in Beverly Hills. And he says when people come in to get hypnotherapy from him, they come in already in a hypnotic trance. And he has to break them out of the trance in order to put them in a trance in order to help them.
Would you like me to unmute him?
Sure.
Okay, let's see if he has something to say. Hello?
Hello. Yes.
Yes.
This is very interesting to me. I would like to ask this gentleman. Did I hear you right? You are a degreed Mason.
Yes, 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in Long Beach.
Okay. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I have somehow gone astray with my knowledge. But I think someone a Mason talking on these levels in public just a few years ago would have been tantamount to suicide. What has changed? What has changed that has allowed this to happen? Really interested.
Well, I mean, in terms of the gang stalking itself, I'm not aware of any connection between Freemasonry and the gang stalkers. At least I'm not aware of that. In terms of my connection to Richard, it was the way it plays into the story is simply that's how I met Richard. I mean, I think that's why Richard was willing to talk to me, because we were part of the same lodge. Also, I actually did a follow-up interview with Richard in Nexus magazine that was published not last year, but the year before. And it was a kind of a follow-up on CHAMELEO, where I interviewed him not about the optical camouflage technology, but mainly about his experiences being a Rosicrucian and a Freemason. And he went into great detail about it was his experiences as a Rosicrucian and a Freemason going back to, he was initiated on Guam back in the 50s. And that it was his experience with Rosicrucianism that first started him thinking in these kind of esoteric levels of how to hide things, hidden layers of reality, camouflage. He had heard rumors about ascended masters in Rosicrucianism who were able to cloak themselves using some sort of hypnotic mystic power. And that fascinated Richard, and he thought, well, how would you replicate that using the technology that's available to all of us? So it was kind of studying these esoteric principles in Rosicrucianism that got him thinking along these lines. How can you merge mysticism with technology?
I understand what you're saying there. I'm just having, you are a degreed Mason. Did you say that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm fairly cognizant of the relationship between the Masons and the military-industrial complex, and there is particular proprietary information that is absolutely verboten to divulge. And I like I said it. I don't know what has changed. What in the political winds and the Overton window and the machinations of change in this government has crossed some sort of a magic line that allows this sort of behavior to happen. Do you have any knowledge about that? I mean, as a degreed Mason?
If I was on the air talking about, esoteric Masonic secrets, I mean, maybe that would be different, but I'm not. I'm talking about something that's not really, as far as I know, related to Freemasonry.
I've heard that a lot of targeted individuals do believe that Masons are heavily involved in the targeting. Maybe possibly, Robert, that it's the same way as we were speaking about police officers earlier, that some are involved and some have no knowledge of it. That's possibly where we're going here.
I mean, that's very possible. I wouldn't say that that's impossible. In my first book, Crypto Eschatology, in the introduction, I talk about how I'm a 32nd degree Freemason, and I actually know a woman who's an entertainment lawyer and very successful, rational person. I certainly do not think she's crazy in any way, and she claims that she was the victim of abuse from her father, who was a very powerful judge up in the Pacific Northwest, and that her father was a Mason, and that the other people who abused her when she was a child were also Freemasons. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't necessarily disbelieve her. I have absolutely no personal knowledge or experience of any of that ever happening in any lodge that I've ever seen. But at the same time, as I say in the book, I can't say that that didn't happen. If you're talking about, as we were talking about with the LA Secret Police, the book by Mike Rothmiller about the LAPD, as you say, there's probably LAPD officers who know nothing about this intersection with the LAPD and the intelligence networks. So, I can't sit here and say that that's impossible. But at the same time, I've never met a Freemason who was stalking someone. Put it that way.
Okay, he raised his hand again, so let's see what he has to say.
Yeah, like I said, I'm trying to get a grip on this here because this is phenomenal to me. We certainly know that there are researchers and published authors who have openly been kidnapped and disappeared, and the creator of the Ku Klux Klan, as far as I understand, was a high degree Scottish degree Mason, and the Klan initially had a kind of a hero sort of standing in the antebellum South. They were fighting these criminal gangs of thugs and rapists and all sorts of nasty creatures, and they served that purpose pretty well. But as time went on, and the political winds changed further and further and further to the left, the Klan fell out of favor, and there was a great deal of negative spin about the Klan, especially up through the 60s. The coverage, the media coverage, and all was just it was all like a soap opera, as far as being based in reality. And now
I actually have a whole chapter on that in my first book, Crypto Eschatology. I have a whole chapter on Albert Pike, who basically, he didn't create Scottish Rite Masonry, but he basically created all the higher degrees that we know today as Scottish Rite Masonry, basically from the 4th to the 33rd degree. And Albert Pike created an organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle, which later morphed into what we now know as the Ku Klux Klan. And it's all Albert Pike is a fascinating individual, and a lot of contradictions there. Seemingly, obviously he was a general in the Confederate Army, so I think we can assume he was racist. And yet, on the other hand, he writes this book called Morals and Dogma, which is all about the freedom of human spirit, and et cetera, and et cetera. So Albert Pike wouldn't be the first visionary who is filled with strange contradictions. And so I write about that very subject in my chapter about Pike in Cryptoschatology, which is my first book. Hello.
Okay, Robert. Robert,
I have just one more question, if you don't mind,
okay. Okay.
for the gentleman. I would like to hear your studied opinion of Kennedy's secret society speech, and were the Masons included in that or not? Very interesting.
You know, it's interesting. In the lodge, the Blue Lodge, where I was initiated, which is in Torrance, there are a lot of people from the Philippines there, and in the Philippines, which and what I'm about to say is not coming out of my brain. This is what they told me, and they have family in the Philippines, and they're from the Philippines themselves. They will say to me, Robert, the Philippines is like 100 years in the past. So wherever America was like 100 years ago, that's how it runs politically, and that's how the police run and the military runs in the Philippines. So Masonry is like really important in the Philippines. It's actually very difficult to become a Freemason. So there are a lot of Filipinos who will come, they'll specifically come over to America to be initiated in America because it's so hard to be initiated in the Philippines, so they can go back and be a Mason, and then they will have influence, you know. So in other words, it's now 2019. You know, in 1919, Freemasonry in America was far more prevalent and affluent and powerful than it is today. And I mean, quite frankly, I don't know to what extent JFK was referring specifically to Freemasons, or was he referring to the military-industrial complex in terms of the CIA? Certainly he was antagonistic towards the CIA. He wanted to crush it into a million pieces, I think is the exact quote. So I mean, I tend to think that JFK was referring more along the lines to the secret societies working within the institutions that we're familiar with, like the Central Intelligence Agency, who were certainly antagonistic towards him, and vice versa. I suspect that's what he was referring to, but you know, I'm open to hearing contrary opinion.
It's hard to say because he didn't really name a specific, but he did put it out there that it was out there, you know. So
and no, I mean, it would not have been wise for him to be specific.
Well, the fact that he even did it was probably the demise that he, you know, ended up enduring, you know. So
absolutely.
But you know, we all have our walk in life, that's for sure. Thank you very much for asking the questions. Are you done, sir?
Excuse me. Yeah, I have another question, but I'll just hang back and let everybody else.
Well, we're about to wrap it up here in about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. Wow, man, I wish I could have just like a solid hour with you. Okay.
You know.
Robert, you know, we can always have you come back, Robert. You want to come back?
Absolutely.
I can reschedule you. I'm booked for the next 2 weeks. You want to come back the third week?
Sure, that's fine with me, yeah.
Okay. Well, I will rebook you then, and this gentleman here can come in and have a debate with you if he'd like.
Absolutely, that's fine.
Yeah. I'm more interested in gathering your perspectives, you know, than debating. But yeah. Okay. Well, I haven't really got this question well worded yet, but basically, excuse me, what is your opinion of the international cult that teaches its young from day one that they are chosen by God to be the slave masters of the world. And Zionism in general, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that one.
Did he hang up?
No, he's
No,
still.
Oh, so the worldwide cult is, what is that worldwide cult?
Well, a lot of people don't really know. The victims of the cult, like I say, are routinely and very religiously isolated from mainstream humanity in a lot of respects, which is typical cult behavior. And their children are taught to believe that they are chosen by God to be the basically the slave masters of the world, because they are the only real human beings, and all of us are just animals to be used at their pleasure. And I'm not spinning up some weird sci-fi stuff here. I mean, I can point you at libraries of good solid evidence expanding thousands of years of history. But this cult obviously exists. It been referred to in the 30s as a clique of international gangsters. And that was one of the big bones of contention that actually helped get World War II up and running, and all those millions of people to slaughter each other. And I have thought long and hard about this as trying to work it outside the name of being empathic or having empathy for the millions and millions, I mean untold millions of victims. You want to talk about targeted individuals? I mean, let's get serious here. And that is I guess yeah, that's my question. I have to think sometimes to get the question just right. And if I didn't, please say so.
You know what it makes me think of most immediately off the top of my mind is something that Robert Anton Wilson once said. Robert Anton Wilson wrote Cosmic Trigger and the Illuminati Trilogy and many other books. He said, if there was one monolithic conspiracy behind everything, the world would actually make sense. But since the world doesn't make sense, it seems to be more logical to assume that instead of there being one monolithic conspiracy driving everything, there's actually like 50 or 60 or 120 or 200 conspiracies all working at the same time and all working against each other. And that explains why nothing really makes sense.
Yeah, business.
You know what I'm saying?
Business, as we know, is just bloodthirsty warriors wearing ties. There's no difference between war and business. In fact, this particular cult has declared that war is its harvest.
And then they go let off steam at Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Okay. Thanks a million.
A whole new subject. I hate to cut you short. Thank you, sir, for your input.
Yeah.
This is Professor Robert Guffey, and I will rebook him in 3 weeks, and you can come back and we'll start from the beginning there. Are you still with me, Robert?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. I hate to start a whole new topic at the end of my show and then leave everybody hanging. And
by the way, speaking of Bohemian Grove, I had a student once who actually worked as a waiter at Bohemian Grove one summer.
We got to talk about this when you come back.
Yeah, he had some interesting stories.
Oh, I bet. it's so hard to talk about difficult subjects, especially when you go through some of this yourself, and you feel the pain, like this gentleman said, empathy. You know, and I had to quit taking phone calls from targets because it was weighing on me too heavily. I had to experience my own targeting and then endure theirs. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And then, you know, because they're coming to you for some sort of, what can I do? And
Answer.
there's not much that you can say.
No.
You know.
No. Yes.
I have
Everybody's
heard.
looking for a solution. Everyone's looking for an answer. The best thing that I could have done for any of them was give them advice on how to stay safe as safe as you can. And like I told you about the parabolic microphone, and you surveil them, you know, and then you can kind of see where it's coming from instead of going, where is this coming from, you know?
Oh, and also it gives you an objective proof that of what is happening. I mean, I know there's a woman in Arizona who she decided to put secret microphones in her apartment, and then she would leave, and then she would come back and listen to the recordings, and she would hear people walking around in her apartment seconds after she closed the door.
Yes.
Which indicated that they had already been there when she left, because it was immediate. You know, you could hear them walking around immediately after she left.
Wow.
So I mean, at that point, you have objective evidence. You know, you can hear it for yourself. Okay, I'm not crazy. You know, obviously, I think that that's evidence of the optical camouflage technology. They were already there.
But you know, and the thing is, like I said, they research you, find out, you know, what's happened to you. Like for instance, when they researched me, they found out I had been attacked. Then they kept putting things in my underwear drawer, indicating I was going to be attacked, to try to put fear into you. That's the biggest thing about this program, is it's fear-based. They want you to be afraid.
Oh, let me read you this quote, which you can find if you Google. It's former FBI Assistant Director Thomas Fuentes, and if you Google any of this, you'll be able to find the quote. This is the quote. Former FBI Assistant Director Thomas Fuentes, he said, quote, "If you're submitting budget proposals for a law enforcement agency, for an intelligence agency, you're not going to submit the proposal that we won the war on terror and everything's great, because the first thing that's going to happen is your budget's going to be cut in half. You know, it's my opposite of Jesse Jackson's Keep Hope Alive. It's Keep Fear Alive. Keep it alive," unquote. There you go. I mean, it comes down to money. And it comes down to how do you raise money, and you don't raise money through peace.
Yeah. You know, here's a perfect example. I was standing in front of the meat department, and I wanted a roast cut up for me, and this guy just kind of kept pushing me a little bit, and I went, "Here we go," you know, and it was funny because he said, "Oh man, look at all that blood. Did you ever see so much blood? Oh God, blood, blood, blood here, blood there." Kept talking about blood, and then he kept asking me if I ever seen so much blood. And what he was trying to do is gaslight me and put fear into me. And I said, "Oh yeah, my dad used to kill chickens. Well, you ever see a chicken with his head chopped off? That blood squirts everywhere." And I kind of freaked him out.
that sounds like there's a story I tell in the book where Damien had come to my apartment in Long Beach, and he helped me move in to this new apartment, and then he had to leave, and he goes, you know, you should be careful. Be careful about new people entering your life, people you've never met before. And I thought he was being a little overly cautious. He leaves, and later that day, a friend of mine who I had met, she had been a student in the very first semester I ever taught. She was visiting from New York. She wanted to meet me and go out to lunch, and so she takes the bus down to where I am in downtown Long Beach, and she calls me on her cell phone. She goes, "I'm on the bus. I'll meet you like on the corner." I go, "Okay." So I go on the corner. She gets off the bus, and there's a guy with her, and she hadn't mentioned that she was bringing anyone along. And she goes, "Oh, I met this guy on the bus." It's this, he shakes my hand. He claims that he's a dock worker down at the docks in Long Beach. I shake his hand. He's got, like, his hands are like as soft as a baby's bottom. he's got like manicured fingernails, but he's a dock worker,
Yeah.
and he intercepted her on the bus and inculcated himself, and somehow invites both of us to go to a restaurant called 555, which is like a high-end restaurant in Long Beach, just down the street from where I live. And I'm like, what's going on here? This is really weird. And so we go with him to the restaurant. My friend walks away at some point to go talk on the phone. So now this is the first time that me and this guy are together alone. He suddenly turns to me and he goes, "Have you ever heard of Milton William Cooper? Book called Behold the Pale Horse. Ever heard of that book?" Now, of course, everyone who
knows
knows
about
anything
William
about
Cooper.
UFOs or conspiracies knows William Cooper. It was interesting, though, that he said, "Have you ever heard of Milton William Cooper?" Which is interesting because that is actually his name. And if you look on the side of the book, it says Milton William Cooper, but no one says that. Everyone calls him Bill Cooper or William Cooper. It's like a baseball fan calling Babe Ruth by his real name.
Yes.
And have you ever heard of Milton William Cooper? And I'm like, no, who's that? I just act stupid. And then he starts explaining who William Cooper is. And he wrote this book called Behold the Pale Horse. And this is 2005. George Bush is still president. Just out of the blue, he starts saying, what about that George Bush? Don't you think where's Lee Harvey Oswald when you need him? Don't you think we need someone to just take that guy out? What do you think? And I immediately say, I love Bush. Yeah, I voted for him twice. Of course, I didn't. But I love that guy. And he seemed like completely surprised by what I was saying. Like I was supposed to say, oh yes, let's do it, man. And then I don't know, ninjas were going to come out and like arrest me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm good friends with retired Joint Chief of Staff of the Pentagon, Al Cuppett, who is personal friends with Milton Cooper. And he spoke to him. Oh, yeah. And he told me one time in an interview that he was actually speaking to William Cooper a few days before the whole shooting him goes down. And he said, I warned him not to put that book out. And he said that it was the end of him. So yeah, personally.
And it's interesting that he dies. Was it right after 9/11?
I think it was before. But the thing is, they say that he was because Al and I talked about this. It was one of my interviews that was deleted. I told you that in the email that I sent you that 300 of my shows were deleted. And I asked for an explanation, and no one's given me one. So, I was a little downhearted about it at first, but I thought, what? I'm just going to I'll just get back with the people that I enjoyed interviewing, and I'll do it again.
Yeah, that's a good attitude to have. A very, very Zen-like attitude. So you did an interview about Cooper?
Well, actually, I was interviewing Al Cuppett, and we were talking about the guillotines that were brought into our country, and also some of the things that were being done to American citizens and blah, blah, blah. And we got onto the subject of Bill Cooper, and he talked about that. And we also talked about Waco. He knows a lot about Waco. He doesn't like talking about any of that anymore, but he's been targeted too. So right now, I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and he said, basically, I just want to tell people to get their spiritual house in order because the time is short. I'm done talking about the NWO, but you can Google him, Al Cuppett, NWO, and go over to his website, and all the stuff we covered is there. He was 35 years military, and I'm pretty sure he did serve under Bush and Cheney. It shows all his documentation there on his website. But yeah.
How do you spell the last name?
Cuppet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I posted something right after the Stephen Paddock shootings in Long Beach. I posted something I have a website, cryptoschatology.com, which I guess I should mention. And I called it cryptoschatology because it would be hard to spell and you couldn't find the website. But it's crypto, CRYPTO, SCATOLOGY, which is the title of my first book. So cryptoschatology.com. If you look at my Sunday, October 8th, 2017 post, I posted an interesting video that Wayne Cooper made years ago all about the symbolism of the Luxor Hotel, which was the site of the shooting, the Stephen Paddock shooting. And so if you look at the post, it's called The Source of Light, Wayne Cooper and the Luxor Hotel, you'll see a link to a YouTube video that Cooper did all about Luxor and the sort of esoteric symbolism of Las Vegas. It's actually quite fascinating, and I don't know, check it out if you wish.
We'll have to cover some of this when you come back, Robert.
I'm happy to come back.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for, we just burned right through that 2 hours. Yeah, but
Absolutely.
You are one of my favorite people. You are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
And why don't you throw out there where we can get your books at? And then I will rebook you, and I will send you a message with the date, and we'll be looking forward to having you back in 3 weeks.
Well, you can get CHAMELEO from orbooks.com. That's ORBOOKS.com. And my first book, Cryptoschatology, you can get on Amazon and from the publisher, Trineday, TRINEDAY.com. And then my second book, Spies and Saucers, you can get that on Amazon or from the publisher, PS Publishing. Spies and Saucers is fiction, but it sort of ties into some of this information as well, very heavily so, in fact. And Until the Last Dog Dies, which is the novel that we started talking about, you can get that on Amazon, or you can even go into Barnes & Noble and find it sitting on the shelf. So yes, please. And then my next book is all about, it's kind of out of left field from what we were just talking about in a way, but it's all about the films of Bela Lugosi. And it's kind of like a cultural analysis of the 1940s and World War II America as seen through the films of Bela Lugosi. And then I'm also doing, also this year, is a collection of novellas called Widow of the Amputation and Other Weird Crimes, which is weird crime noir stories all set in different areas of Southern California and very much tied into everything we're talking about with the esoteric symbolism and et cetera. And the title story is all about Charles Manson taking a road trip with the severed head of Mary Magdalene. I won't go into any more detail than that. Well,
after you get that one out there, we'll have to talk about that.
That should be coming out in the spring, right around Easter, appropriately enough.
Okay, Robert. Well, thank you so much, sweetie. I always love talking to you. Like I said, you're one of my favorites. And we will be looking forward to you coming back in 3 weeks. I'll get that information. I did put the link up in your Facebook message for Mark Rich, so you can go check his book out and his articles, because he gives out a lot of good information that possibly can help Damien.
Oh, good. That's fantastic. Yes, I'll immediately look into that and then pass that along.
Okay, and I want to thank you again. Great show tonight. Always a delight to talk to you, and we will be looking forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to talking to you again in a few weeks.
Okay. Bye-bye,
okay,
sweetie.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, bye. Good night.
And that was Professor Robert Guffey, and he is talking about his book, CHAMELEO, and it's about a targeted individual. And I want to thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Everybody have a blessed and pleasant week. And remember, Bad Baby loves you.